Hello, and welcome to the Conference Board's Conference Keynotes presentations. This is our opportunity to share with you the very best of our very popular conferences. Today, we're focused on our Leadership Development Conference from last spring, where the theme was Culture and Context Matter. We're going to focus on three topics today, taking from two of our really popular sessions. We're going to be looking at how organizations can optimize opportunities that allow for both men and women to succeed, and how the most innovative companies have taken a novel approach to strengthening leadership and driving innovative products and services to their customers, and how to invest in the development of a growth mindset at your organization and develop innovation throughout your leadership ranks. So we've got three great speakers that are going to be sharing their experiences. But before we get to them, I need to cover one important housekeeping issue. Many of you watching today want to earn continuing education credits with either HRCI, SHRM, or CPE. In order to earn that, you need to stay with us throughout the entire presentation webcast. And at the end, you'll need to enter in your name, email, and please specify which of the three continuing education credits you would like to earn. So again, please stay on throughout the webcast and be sure to enter that information at the end. Don't worry, I'll remind you. So now we can jump into the substance of the webcast. But first, let me introduce you to our three speakers. Richard Brown is the Vice President of Philanthropy at American Express. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Matt Luke is Global Learning and Development Strategy Creative Manager at 3M. Thank you. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
And Erica Uwag is Community and Networks Leader for Global Learning and Development at Microsoft. Welcome, Erica.
Hey.
And I'm Russell Morris. I'm going to be your host. I'm also going to be your voice. And so right below this image is a chat box. If you could please, throughout this conversation, if you could enter in your questions, I'll be reading them and be your voice to introduce them into the conversation that we're having here in the studio. So let's jump in and ask each of our speakers to share with us a little bit about their story, to give us some context of what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to ask Matt to go first and talk about the work that he's been doing at 3M and building a growth mindset and driving that transformation. So Matt, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on?
Sure, thanks, Russell. My name is Matt Luke. I work with 3M and our leadership development team. I work with an incredible team of instructional designers as well as program managers. We've got responsibility for also contributing and shaping the 3M culture. And we've been on a journey for about the last 3 years where we did a needs analysis to start out. And what we heard from our leaders is a lot of people were thinking too incrementally. We needed leaders to start acting more transformationally in their thinking. And we identified some of the barriers as being a reluctance to take a risk, a desire to play it safe. And so what we started to do is we uncovered some research from Carol Dweck around growth mindset and fixed mindset. We also took some great cues from Microsoft as well as American Express and what they were doing to shape their cultures. And we said, how can we bring this to 3M to accelerate our innovation and our growth? And so the team set out on a path to design things from workshops to virtual instructor-led sessions to asynchronous content that could be completed online. And what we've been doing over the last almost 3 years here now is rolling out things slowly, starting with employees at a real grassroots level. We've done things on a shoestring, very small budget, very small team, but we've been very clever, almost a very scrappy team in the way that we figure out how to get things done with very few resources. And as a result, we've been able to build credibility around this topic. And it's culminated just recently with being able to get this topic in front of our CEO and his direct reports, where they have shown also a great interest in doing more with it to help transform the culture.
So Matt, before we move on,
Russell, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Before we move on real quick, just one quick, can you give people just a glimmer of When you're talking about growth mindset, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so when we think of growth mindset, it's this belief that people have the capability to develop with effort and persistence. They can learn through the process of experimentation. The idea is that it's going to lead to transformational innovation in our company. And if you look back far enough in 3M's history, you'll find William McKnight has a great quote about if you put fences around people, you'll get sheep. It's this idea that you need to provide freedom of people to go out and experiment. We often think of it in terms of this 20% and the projects that people will take on in extra time that's beyond the typical scope of their jobs. And so when we think of that growth mindset, we think about it in the academic sense, but we're also trying to figure out what does that look like? How do we apply that in an organizational setting?
Awesome. So we're going to get back to it with more questions, both yours and the panelists. But let me turn to Erica, so Erica can give us a little context about what she's been leading at Microsoft.
Thanks, Russell. Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Uwag, and I'm a community and networks leader at Microsoft. And as many of you probably seen in the press, that we've been on a very long cultural journey so far, roughly over 5 years now, which was prompted by our new CEO, Satya Nadella, where he really was honing in on around our ability to be a learning organization, and that it starts with, just as Matt described, growth mindset. And so it really starts with person, with each individual having the potential to learn anything that they want to learn, and that will fuel and accelerate our cultural transformation as a company. So I've been at Microsoft for a little over 2 years now, and what I've seen so far is high energy around the direction of our company. And so what I do as part of the Global Learning and Development Organization is focus in on generating a social movement, if you will, that spreads viral energy to accelerate our cultural transformation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get to it. So thanks, Russell. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Erica. And I'm really excited about this because Erica's story is really from the bottoms up and inverts a lot of what we're thinking. Matt is, to a certain extent, really inverts what we think about in terms of leadership development in the traditional sense. So I'm excited to get into more detail. So, Richard, you're coming from a different session at the conference, one that was really a very popular panel discussion about particularly about bringing women into leadership development. But you bring an even different perspective to it because you're coming at this from American Express's philanthropy efforts. So can you tell us a little bit about what American Express is doing to help the audience understand the context here?
Sure. So thank you, Russ. Appreciate it and great to be here. The company, many of you may know, has been around for a while. We're 170 years, almost 170 years old, and leadership has really been a core value for the company. It's something that everyone is involved in leadership development. There are actual training programs that we have, some online, some in person. So leadership and the importance of leadership is really critical to us. And we thought, the leadership thought of the company, is that we also recognize that in the nonprofit sector, and the nonprofit sectors that are so critical to our communities, and as I mentioned, a company that's 170 years old, we have very robust community relations because we've been in these communities for so very long. And so we thought that one way for us to give back and one way for us to really to strengthen those communities was to provide leadership training to the nonprofit sector. And so we decided back in 2007 to create a leadership team that actually would focus on developing next generation talent, develop those emerging leaders who are going to essentially step into those leadership roles when baby boom generation leaders were going to be dropping out of the sector or moving on to encore careers. And so we found that this was an important area, is one that was in demand. There was a bridge span study done back in 2006 that actually showed that there was going to be a deficit. It changed eventually into a leadership development deficit, but at the time it was they coined the phrase the nonprofit leadership deficit, and that so many of these baby boom generation leaders were going to be leaving the sector, leaving a void that needed to be filled. And so we actually have stepped into that void. And one other thing that makes this so critical is because nonprofit organizations in many cases don't have the resources to provide leadership training. They consider it a luxury to provide something like leadership development to their employees. And so one more really reason and rationale for us to get into this in a really robust way. And so it's been since 2007 that I've been involved in it and developing programs that essentially address the leadership development needs of the nonprofit sector, and particularly those folks who are emerging and who are going to be next generation leaders. All
right. So this, well, having worked for a whole series of nonprofits, thank you for that. It's so true that even talking about leadership and having a coherent conversation about it with any depth is difficult to have, because everyone is just running so hard on a bare bones budget and everybody's wearing different hats. So I can relate only too well, having come up through the ranks in different ones. But let's engage with each of our speakers and get a little bit more in the nuance of what's going on and how they're constructing it. And Matt, I'm going to go back to you. One of the I think one of the challenges of a growth mindset is overcoming the opposite of that. Is the fear of failure, right? Because people feel unnecessary walls around what they're doing. So as you've been trying to embrace, get people to shift the way they're thinking, how are you addressing this basic fundamental fear of failure that so limits one's mindset? If you follow Carol Dweck's work, et cetera.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things we've been doing. In particular, one is just introducing the concepts of growth mindset. That is sharing some of the research. We are at a very science-based organization, so people want to see the data. What does that look like? And that's one way. It sort of raises the awareness. The second thing that we recognize, though, is so important. It's in the environment. And so while it's helpful to know what a growth mindset is, it's even more helpful to have people that will support the right environments for that by creating psychological safety. And so we've paired up this idea of growth mindset with the psychological safety to make sure that people have fewer of those barriers, are more open, are more candid, are willing to talk about when things didn't go right, learn from it, and then have the right environments to ensure that people are not being punished for admitting to these failures or things that didn't work out. And we've even tried to frame the language as different. We try not to think of things necessarily as failures, as successes, but they're experiments. We might have a hypothesis. Sometimes that proves out to be accurate, sometimes not. But doing the small things like shifts in the language, as well as creating the right environments, are the items that are helping us reduce some of those barriers or reluctance to demonstrate a growth mindset.
So Matt, if I'm a 3M employee, how am I going to see or experience this?
Yeah, so we've approached it from many different ways. Some of the big ways are the kind of the traditional learning and development. We've created classroom activities where people can come to a workshop, learn about it. We've also put that content online. We've created these virtual learning environments where people can come and talk and discuss the themes. It starts at a basic level. From there, we've dialed it up to a 2.0 and even a 3.0 growth mindset session where we've got leaders involved. They're getting up in front, they're introducing the topics, talking about why it's important to them. They're also following up in their communications and making sure that it's reinforcing these ideas, that it's visible when things go well, but also when things don't go well, and importantly, adding the components around learning. Most recently, I've mentioned that we had this in front of us, our executive leaders, just in January, and we had a leader that actually displayed this. During the morning session, they had made a comment offhand, and later they recognized that it might not have been interpreted correctly or in a way that they intended. And so after the lunch break, they actually got back up on stage and said, "Hey, I just want to clarify. I think I misspoke earlier. Please know what my intent was. I'm now sensitive to what I said, and I'll do it differently going forward." And the reaction in the room was significant. People said, "We're not just giving lip service to growth mindset, but here's a leader who we just put through a keynote on the topic who's actually immediately applying it So these are just some of the ways that it's starting to get out in terms of the stories. And that's really helping us reinforce the concepts and ideas.
So Matt, there's one thing that you said there that I just want to make sure is clear with the audience. This isn't your traditional, okay, I worked all this out with the executive leadership team, I took them through it, and then I went down the next layer and then cascaded my way down through the organization. Give us a little bit of context about how your initiative developed and evolved.
Yeah, so we did this global needs assessment about 3 years ago, and we talked to many leaders, and this is where we picked up on the themes of needing more transformational thinking, doing more experimentation, taking more risk. From that, the team developed content for it. But this was really a learning and development initiative. We didn't have a champion or a sponsor. And so we had to get really scrappy and creative with this. We started developing our own content internally. This was the workshops, little meeting in the boxes that managers could take and roll out with their teams. We're also thinking about what are some of the language and words. We created stickers and posters, a little booklet, things that would just help reinforce the ideas. And again, this was on a very, very minimal budget. Now, we've been rolling this out for a couple of years, and sometimes luck is all about preparation and when it meets opportunity. And so when the company decided to launch a new cultural initiative last year, our opportunity came up to connect growth mindset to the business objectives on a really big way. So while we had a business case before, it didn't have the recognition or support of executive leaders. And what we've been able to do over the last year is help them understand what we've already been doing in this space, but also make sure we're getting the messages in front of them and getting them to be contributors to it. In a way, it's very different than some things we've done in the past, where it typically comes top-down. This was more of a bottoms-up approach to the topic. And right now, it's just getting the legs because of this opportunity that's come about.
Excellent. Now, Erica, in you're also, I mean, you're working at the grassroots, developing these communities. Talk to us about what that feels like for a Microsoft employee who, wants to lead change in their space.
Yeah, sure. So it actually started, I actually want to take everybody back to when I started at Microsoft, because I think some of you, when you start a company, you'll experience this experience as well. And so typically when you go through your onboarding process, you are given maybe a list of people to meet, and then from there, it kind of just grows, right? Other people are like, hey, you should meet this person in this organization, they lead this, or you should meet this person because they're passionate about that. And that was exactly the experience that I had. And what I experienced was, like I mentioned in the intro, just high energy in our employee populations all over the place, actually. It isn't just designated to one function, but just high energy around where we're going as a company and where we're going culturally. And the more and more people I came across, the more I met people who started leading initiatives on their own. So you would have an engineer who created a mindfulness program, and it's 12 weeks long, and he's already taken 200 people through it. And then I would meet somebody in the customer service organization, and one of the cultural attributes we have is being customer obsessed. And they created a program on their own, or a gathering or a culture team around how they could be a little bit more customer obsessed. And so when I created this movement, I started targeting those people first. And because they care. They wanted to bring people together. And so when I formed what I call Mavericks, it's really a network of these change agents who already saw an issue and decided to do something about it. But I wasn't threatened by it. I was actually seeing it as a positive because they want to do the right thing and they want to help. They're not quite sure how they might be able to do that, and so they created their own effort. And so the hypothesis that I had is if we bring these people together and we share with them the direction that we're trying to go through as a company, our efforts collectively will be much more impactful. And that effort started with about 14 people that I came across, and in one location. It's now grown to over 950 people in over 40 countries. And people find out about it through word of mouth. I just created a website. It's a basic SharePoint site maybe a few months ago. And so people find out about that, find about Mavericks that way. But mostly it's just through word of mouth of like, hey, I think you'd be interested in joining this community. We go through these experiment cycles where we focus less on theory because we have a lot of our formal solutions that really give you the evidence-based practices. And in Mavericks, what you do is really just focus on learning by doing. And so playing with those behaviors that we said are important to our culture or our spouse culture, but experimenting with them and generating for the individual their own practice-based evidence of how these behaviors work for them in their context and their day-to-day. And essentially what this mechanism does is it seeds the behaviors that we want throughout the organization in a more grassroots way, and we penetrate the organization deeper than if we were to go the traditional way of top-down. So I see it more as a kind of a twofer where we have efforts top-down, plus we have the support of this grassroots effort that's building reinforcement in the day-to-day context.
That's so cool. And Sarah has cut the ribbon with the first question from the audience. So thank you, Sarah. Encourage everyone else to type in their questions in the chat box. And and the question really is, how do you influence these change agents within your company through the company culture to take that initiative? So I'm going to take Sarah. I'm hoping I'm treating Sarah's question correctly. One is, how are you identifying the change agents? And the second is, how are you aligning the company's values with what the change agents' values are?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do is I actually invert the process. So I actually say, we're looking for these kinds of people who care about helping others, people who care about Microsoft's and others' success, people who care about really bringing to life our culture. And that culture is segmented, and grounded by growth mindset. We look at how are we cultivating one Microsoft, and by stating the intention of, who would fit this criteria, I then leave it up to the individuals to opt in. And research has shown whether it's, and I think, we could talk to this a little bit more, especially from the philanthropic lens, is people who opt into something because they're passionate are much more engaged, much more committed. And it's really about you as the orchestrator, as the administrator, really being okay with how they come up with making this real in the organization. But it's not saying that they're going to go rogue. So some people get turned off by the term Mavericks, but essentially what it is these are people who are demonstrating courage, who demonstrate a growth mindset, and they want to be aligned to where we want to be as a company. They're helping us with the how. So I hope that answers your question. It's really not about me volunteering somebody or getting them nominated. It's more like, hey, from a social lens, and I think before this call, Russell was actually recommending a movie to us. It's just like that. Hey, I've experienced this thing. I think it's great. Here's my personal take on it. I think you'd like it. You should check it out. And that's how it spreads through word of mouth. So same thing with this initiative.
Yeah, I was very intrigued by the use of the word Maverick, which you just mentioned. And I'm wondering, given the fact that Microsoft is a global company, has facilities and a market that's actually all over, how does this idea of being a Maverick, kind of doing things proactively, how does that actually take form in countries where being a Maverick may not necessarily be a positive or looked down upon?
Yeah, we actually don't promote the term Mavericks to people. So when people say like, "Oh, I'm a part of this Maverick community," there's nothing that says like, "Here's a badge, I'm a Maverick," or here's something on my username on Outlook that says anything like that. It's more like this underground kind of hidden persona, if you will, of a person who is essentially an activist of getting us to where we want to be as a company. And so by no means is it meant to be anything to boast about or to show off about. It's really more of how are you kind of helping yourself developmentally, helping others developmentally, because it's a cohort-based experience that then just an outcome of that formed this community. Really focused on learning and developing yourself so that you're role modeling the behaviors that we want to see in our culture. And it's funny because I actually just had a conversation about this the other day with someone who's very senior in the organization who is a Maverick himself. And he did share with the rest of the community, he's like, when I first met Erica, I told her she should change the name. And he's like, but actually having gone through the experience, now being a part of this community, I totally get why we're called Mavericks, because we are going against the grain, but not in disruptive ways. We're doing it in very subtle, like non-threatening, respectful ways. But it does require us to have a little risk because we're going to act a little bit differently. We're going to test our automatic responses and try something else. And that might, be weird to other people who think that they can assume you would respond in a specific way because that's your automatic behavior. But and what I've seen actually with some of these people who make up the Maverick community, they say, there's situations where, maybe I'm seeing something that's not in alignment with our culture. And I want to say something to say that's not okay, but I want to say it in a respectful way. So, and they're like, I put on my invisible Maverick hat and I say, hey, so-and-so, when you say X, Y, and Z, it impacts me in this way. And so they give constructive feedback. But because they have this persona, this community of support of these Mavericks, it gives them this essentially permission to act with courage.
So Matt, I was watching you on the screen as Erica was speaking, and I saw you nodding over and over again, like what she was saying resonated with your experience at 3M. Is there a little something there that you can share?
There is, yeah. We've been using the term very similar to Microsoft, but we call them game changers. And the idea, again, it's not a formal title, it's not a badge or any of that, but it's the idea that these people have a disproportionate impact because they're taking some actions that separates them from the other leaders. These are the real change agents in the organization. They're boundary spanners. They're thinking broadly and connecting different groups of people, both inside and outside of the organization. Total agreement with what Erica is talking about.
So there are a couple of questions that have come through, and I just want to touch them real quick, and then Richard, I have something for you. Some of the questions were, can either of you give specific examples on what some of the behaviors are being deep-rooted through through your efforts, and can you give some examples of what risk either the game changers or the Mavericks are taking? I mean, are we talking big economic risk, or are we talking about big social risk? Can you give us some context on either of those? So either of you would like to start on that one?
Yeah, I could give it a shot. So some of the behaviors that the Mavericks experiment with are things around our cultural attributes. And so one of our cultural attributes is inclusion. So diversity and inclusion, excuse me. But we really central in on the behaviors around inclusion. And with that, what we do is we deconstruct some behaviors, not all the behaviors, because there's so many, but some behaviors that accumulate into one way of demonstrating inclusion. And so the risk associated with that is, for example, some of us have seen or have been in meetings where if we're in deep discussion, you see some people kind of stating a statement, stating another statement, stating another statement. And it's just kind of like this back and forth. Now, for some of us who are inclined to do such behaviors in a heated discussion or any discussion, some of the examples that I have Mavericks try in the experiments is, instead of jumping in automatically, what if you wait, and instead of stating a statement, what if you ask a question? Because questions have unlocking effects in the brain, and people are intent to, are really inclined to answer your questions. And so some of the Mavericks then experiment with that, and they said, what did you experience by asking a question instead of stating a statement? They said, wow, people actually paused and thought about it, and then we actually were able to be more constructive in the discussion. I actually had one particular person said that she was able to accomplish an hour meeting in 19 minutes. And some of her peers said, that's not like you to really pause, have the group pause and you throwing out a question to us. So what was that about? And for her, she was like, wow, that was really different for me because I don't normally do that. And so there's a small social risk with that, because people have automatic assumptions or responses to things or things that you do, and it's unexpected. Like, whoa, you're asking a question instead of like yelling or something. I don't know, I'm just making it up, but it's kind of like examples like that. Matt, did you have anything you want to share?
Sure, yeah. Some of the ways that we're reinforcing this is just through the use of stories. And so when I think about one of these game changers, we were introducing a new product, and as we're getting it out the door, a competitor stepped forward and said, hey, within the near future, we are going to launch a better product, and it's going to totally take away all of your market. And the team at that point, I'm sure they felt a little defeated, but what they did is they actually went back to the challenge. It's within our healthcare space, and they said, getting away from kind of how we approached this problem before, how might we apply some other approach? In this case, they went to technology. And using the technology, they actually came up with a new product that would speed up the time even faster than the competitor's product. And importantly, because the competitor had pre-announced this with about a year time frame, our team was not only able to come up with a better, faster product, but they were able to launch it prior to the competitors doing so. And so we talk about this story in the context of growth mindset. It's about being able to recognize as things are changing in the environment, we need to experiment, we need to think differently, we need to reach out and connect with others, look for ideas in non-traditional places, and bring that in and bring it to life. And so that's just some of the way that we're helping to reinforce it, is through the use of these stories and highlighting it, making sure that people can see these things in the culture. And in this case, it's a behavior, as I said, it's in the 3M's DNA of innovation and experimentation. In a way, we've just had to sort of reinvigorate that spirit and make sure that people are talking about it, make it more present. And so for those in the company who might feel a little pressure to just be performing instead of improving themselves, they're able to recognize and say, oh, other people in the company are doing this, I can do this as well. Here are the benefits to it. And so far, it's helping to just move the needle a little bit in the ways that we need at this moment.
So, Matt, I think you were doing a mind meld with Jeff, because he had just specifically asked a question about an example that might draw the attention of your CEO or another business leader about the impact. So that's right on target. And Alyssa had a question, then we're going to move on to Richard. You mentioned that you were using these success stories to build out, both of you did. How do you share those? I mean, do you take out ads on the, on your intranet? What are you doing to tell the story?
So for my initiative, we use Microsoft Teams. We're using it actually as a community platform, which I don't believe that's what it was meant for, but we're Mavericks, what can you say? I have the Mavericks actually share their stories. And so you could see the thread on Microsoft Teams of people sharing the stories of, hey, I, just overheard some people saying some things and it wasn't really in alignment to our culture. Can I get help? And the community dives in and supports and helps. And they say, hey, do you need to talk? Do you want to come through to my building and we can, work out a plan? And he's like, well, here I go. I'm going to go and try it. And so it's through those stories to kind of tag on to the question around rewards and recognition. The community recognizes each other. And so with that example, that very brief example that I just shared, that was a win for the community. The way that we're looking at elevating these stories broadly to the organization, I've also created a monthly newsletter because people say that our Teams feed is way overwhelming. It's just one of the most active community platforms that we have, at least that I've seen here. And so I created a monthly newsletter that highlights some of the stories that are on Teams. Other things that we're going to do, and it's actually more of, I don't know if some of you folks on the line are like in content curation or digital marketing, but we're really taking the social media play where we want to start surfacing some of the stories that the Mavericks have experienced that are representative of, speaking up, demonstrating a growth mindset. So everything that are really aligned with our cultural attributes and our values, and then sharing that out broadly with the organization. And then other ways that we share stories are Mavericks also create their own content. So whether it's a blog that they write, maybe webinars or video recordings that they have, they post it on to them, with themselves on Teams, or they post it on LinkedIn. And so we share stories out that way as well. So they do, at least.
Matt, do you have a quick addition, maybe 15, 20 seconds?
Sure. Yeah, we do it the traditional ways, that you would expect. So this could be things on our intranet website, and we also invite speakers to town halls to share stories. The other aspect that I would add is we're equipping our managers and leaders to make it part of their weekly and monthly meetings with their teams. And so while the stories may not be broadcast broadly, they're coming up with their own small examples that are relevant and real.
Excellent, thank you. And we had a question, Richard, I had been meaning to toss this over to you, but we had so much energy right there, we kept with it. But as Erica and Matt were talking, one of the questions was around how do you get people from various cultures where speaking up, where taking on leadership may not be a traditional expectation within their space. And certainly you're working in a global context, and you're working in communities where women may not be expected to take on a traditional role, a leadership role in this way. How are you consciously trying to make this inclusive and bring this next generation into play here?
Well, the program is global. We're supporting organizations in different parts of the world. We have a leadership academy that we created back in 2008 that is now in 10 different countries, and that represents countries in Africa and Asia and Europe and the United States. And so it is a very diverse group of programs, and it is customized. I mean, one of the things that I would have to say about the programs that we do, particularly this Leadership Academy, is that it is a program that is designed for the folks who are from those communities. And so there are very specific elements of it that are going to address cultural concerns that they might have. And so, for instance, as an example, we do 360 evaluations in most of the places that where we have an academy. However, in Japan, where that's not necessarily appropriate to have a 360 evaluation and get feedback from all those players, we don't do a 360 evaluation, don't require them to do that. And so I think we are very cognizant of the fact that we have to customize the programs. We have been very proactive, however, in getting women into programs. And so I would say in the U.S., the majority of the people who attend our Leadership Academy are women. We actually have a specialized women academy for women in music. That's actually for both for-profit women in music as well as nonprofit. We just this past year created a program in South Africa specifically for women from Southern African countries. We had 25 women from representing 8 different countries in the southern part of Africa. And so we are both deliberate about making sure that we're getting women into the programs, and in places where women aren't traditionally supposed to be in those types of roles, we're being very deliberate about creating programs so that they can have that training and that they can take on those leadership positions. But it is, I'd have to say, overall, it's very customized. We're working with local partners who are creating programs that are very suited for the folks who are going to be in the classroom and participating in those programs.
And do you find it difficult on the ground to get the buy-in, to get the organizations that you're supporting to carve out time for these upcoming leaders to go through this?
Well,
there's got to be some pushback there.
That's right? A good point. I mean, it is that's time is money, and so there is I would imagine some resistance, but I think overall they see this as a real critical part of developing the talent. They, as you know, as we mentioned, it's hard for them to be able to pay for it themselves, and so we're offering this training free of charge. And so folks are able to come get the training, and it's being conducted by experts in the field, groups like the Common Purpose, which is based out of the United Kingdom, Center for Creative Leadership, Aspen Institute, Ashoka. These are some of the partners that we have. And so they're folks who are in this particular arena who are actually quite good at delivering this content. And so folks, we don't have a hard time recruiting people. We actually have to turn people away. And particularly we have boot camps with Ashoka for social entrepreneurs in Kenya and in Senegal, and we have extremely long lists of people who would like to participate who just aren't able to because we only serve 25 people at a time. So the demand is very significant in Africa. It's also significant in Asia, where we have programs in Singapore and Hong Kong and in Japan. So I don't think there's a lack of demand and lack of interest in this. I think that folks are very thirsty to get this type of training.
And is it my understanding that you are not only providing them the training, but you're also providing them a network somewhat similar to what Erica's been describing to continue the learning afterwards, right?
So for our Academy program, we have a very robust LinkedIn group. We also have about 2,800 people now who have joined from across the world. And so that is an additional part of the program, is that they have an opportunity to be part of this growing network of like-minded nonprofit and social purpose leaders who have an opportunity to come to, there's an opportunity for them to come to DC. We have 100 people coming to DC in March to participate in an alumni-driven summit. We have online training that they're able to take advantage of. And so yes, it's really the beginning. The training really is an entree into this network, and we hope that they continue with us as ongoing learners.
Now, so Erica and Matt, you both also referred to sort of this entree training. Can you give us a brief glimpse of what that looks like, and if there's any context that you can share that makes it appropriate, as Richard was talking about, for different groups? Okay.
Sorry, I could give it a shot. So with Mavericks, like I said, it is learning by doing. And so the modality that I offer is an hour a week for 4 weeks. And the structure of it is very little teach, a whole lot of discussion, and then you go into your everyday work context and experiment. And then the following week you come back, and then we learn a little bit something new. And after that series, or experiment cycle as I call them, some of them are hungry for more. And I say, here's a whole portfolio. I do sit in the L&D function, and so I say, here's a whole portfolio of courses you could take, resources you can access. We also have LinkedIn Learning as well that they can tap into. And so it's really a nice on-ramp into building a demand and desire for our learning solutions. Matt, did you want to share your example?
Yeah, sure. We do a bit of consulting with the business often, just to identify what challenges are and size up opportunities. And with that, typically the entree for us will be introducing them to some sort of workshop, and that could be in person, online. For those who don't have a way to do that or need a little more flexibility with global teams, they've got some asynchronous content. From there, we take it from really small entrees to really big experiments in terms of development. And so, for instance, we try to embed these concepts. We intentionally embed these concepts in all of our programs. One of those is where it takes people into the community and they'll work with a social enterprise or nonprofit, and they'll help them solve a business challenge somewhere in the world over the course of a couple of weeks. With that, we provide coaching along the way, and through that coaching, we reinforce the concepts of growth mindset and innovation, and think about in the 3M culture. What do we bring that's uniquely 3M that we can offer to help others solve critical needs and challenges that they have? So I think about it all the way from that entree up to just getting it embedded in some more of our bigger programs and starting to think about the processes that we also need to influence and change.
You know, what I love about all of these stories is you're bringing, I mean, the challenge for years has been to bring the sort of leadership development into the moment that you need it, right? I mean, you can offer a class, but then, you know, how long does it take before you actually get to apply it, and then you scratch your head or whatever. And building the communities that you're talking about really help reinforce that and provide people with immediate access and reinforcement that these are the right behaviors and these are the right tools to get there. So, you know, in each of your efforts, I'm sure it wasn't a cakewalk. You know, you had to do a few face plants or stumbles along the way, but then finally, when you got traction, you were able to take off. Was there a particular moment or moments that were accelerators for you as you were trying to implement this within your organization or within the nonprofit community that you're working in?
I would say that for us, there was a critical moment when I think some of the business units recognized the value of what we were doing and recognized the value of providing this type of training. They saw it as a space that American Express could occupy. It was a niche that was not being taken up by other companies. There's not a lot of companies that are doing leadership development, and so it was an opportunity for us to kind of shine and be seen in a space that everyone sees as a no-brainer in terms of being critical for the nonprofit sector, any sector, is to provide that type of training. So I think the critical moment for us came when the business units where we're doing these various training programs across the globe recognized the importance and saw the value in developing the talent of essentially the people in their community. And so I think that was a turning point for us, and the program accelerated.
Cool. Erica, did you have a trampoline moment?
Oh, yeah. So it was, I think, about 6 months into the whole effort. And we reached about 200 Mavericks globally. For context, I was only working on this as an experiment, and it was about 20% of my time. It still is 20% of my time. And I got to the point where I was way in over my head. My leaders finally caught wind of what the community and I were up to, and they were like, "What's going on over there?" And we like it, and keep going, scale it, And I just had to pull all the Mavericks together, 200 of them, and I said, I can't do this anymore. It's way too much. I also have a day job, and it's like I can't do this anymore by myself. And they're like, "Why do you keep saying that you're doing it by yourself? We're here. Like, look at all of us showed up. Ask for help. What do you need us to do? How can we? What's our goal? How can we scale this thing?" And they turned it into a we conversation. When I was like, "Oh my God, it's just me. What am I going to do?" And they're like, "No, this is our community. What are we going to do?" And that was where it just exploded. And now we're like actually crawling up to 1,000 people now, which is amazing. And
congratulations,
yeah.
Matt.
Yeah, similar to Erica's story, similarities are striking in that it took some early champions to get on board with this. People who saw the concepts, they saw the applicability, saw the value, and we just started collecting these champions and change agents along the way. One of those trampoline moments is when we realized one of the vice presidents in the organization was reading Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, and actually started a book club with all of his direct reports. And they were just doing their own thing. And through word of mouth, we found out they were doing it. We shared with them what we could offer in terms of assets and other things to help them bring those concepts to life. And we got their buy-in and said, yeah, come in, let's talk to all my direct reports. And from there, all of them said, come talk to our direct reports. And so it was this slow growth over time and just getting believers. And as they went through the content and they saw the applicability, they shared it with others, this word of mouth, it traveled and spread. And so if anything, it's just taken a lot of patience, a lot of persistence, recognizing those champions, bringing them in, creating a community and a real movement within the organization.
Yeah, I'm really struck by your statement earlier, Matt, that it's being prepared for when luck strikes, or how did he phrase that? Luck is having the right thing at the right time, or something like that. And it sounds to me like,
yeah, when preparation meets
There
opportunity.
we go. Thank you. It strikes to me in each of the cases, you're really tapped in, listening to the organization. You're not pushing. You're just sort of you're openly listening and active to respond to what's there in a way that doesn't feel like it's a heavy push. Is that an accurate description?
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody who's listening to this is wondering, okay, how can I bring these ideas home, right? I mean, it's really great. You all are three iconic companies. You have a ton of resources. You've got all these great, brilliant people that are working, So how do you take some, if you were going to go work at another company, what would you bring with you from your current experience to help them leverage this insight that you've been from your efforts? So who wants to go first on this?
Well, I know from someone who's worked at a number of different companies over the years is that you would have to bring something. It's the idea of being able to be, I think, innovative and being able to identify something that is very much makes sense and that aligns with the business. So for philanthropy, you want something that's going to align. So what I would do if I were to go to another company is I would analyze what that company is good at, what their product or their service is that is critical, and then I would craft something, grant-making type of a program that essentially aligns with that gets people who are the senior level folks as well as the folks who are your colleagues to nod their heads in agreement that this is the right thing for us to be doing, and then develop a program that essentially meets those goals. So there's a business need, but also a community benefit as well. So that's what I think is the appropriate approach in terms of taking a philanthropic program. I wouldn't take what I'm doing at, that would be like, that's them, we want something that's for us. You take the idea of creating something that is both a company win and a community win, and make that something that would be to make them stand out. That would be my approach.
Okay. Thank you. Matt, you want to go next? Oh no, Erica.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about your question last time, so I wrote it down. I have 4 tips. 1, ask for help and involve others. And then along with that is be open to other people coming up with the how. You set the direction and prepare the vision. Next, 2, be a compulsive connector of ideas and people. And that's how you build your community, and that's how you spread the network. Because you have the vision, you have the direction, and now you're also helping other people buy into that. And by connecting people and ideas, you're able to have them be bought in and share their own and connect themselves to that vision. And the third thing is share the boundaries, so rules of engagement, and get out of the way. And lastly is make it a we conversation. Your role is inspiring people to act, and you encourage them to take action. And it's not just your problem. I used to say it's Erica's problem. Like, don't try to just help Erica. Let's make it, let's help the Mavericks. Let's help you. Let's help this other person. So it's all about us. It's about we. That's it.
Awesome. Matt?
Erica, that was well said. I'm in 100% agreement with you. I'll just leave it there.
Nothing like a ditto there. That was actually very well organized. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this recording so I can write those down in more clear handwriting than I could do here in the studio. The last question I have for you is, what's next? What's next on your vision for, where do you take this next? How do you move beyond what you've already got?
I would have to say for us, we're going to double down on the alumni network. We think that the ability to continually engage individuals beyond the initial training and provide them with ongoing learning is really what we should be doing. Continuing to bring new people into the fold and to create new alums, but really provide additional resources for the alums, provide opportunities for them to do things both online as well as locally. And so that's, I think, what we think is the next step for us. And so we're beginning to do that, but I think that's for us, how do we create a learning community with the folks who have gone through other programs so that they can continue to build their skills is what we're going to do.
For me, it's we're still learning, so we haven't cracked the nut on culture. So we're really just experimenting. And some of the things that I'm thinking about is taking what I've done and learned and observed with Maverick so far, and kind of putting it in their hands to say, hey, maybe you could start up your own 950-person thing. But let's all stay connected, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
Right on. And for us, next steps with any of these big initiatives, it always takes nurturing, and we're never really finished. And so I think about the next steps is we've got to continue to tell our story. We need to get out there, set positive examples, show some success, be able to articulate that. And then the other thing we're trying to do is start to bring it to the processes and the structure and make changes that are fundamental that'll continue to support this idea of growth mindset and innovation going forward.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to getting an update in a year or so with some new things. And Erica, you've doubled in size, or got another colleague with another 900 people, and that your alumni network is 10 times bigger than it is now, and that 3M it just has a dozen new processes that are just really well grounded in this. So thank you all for sharing. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to remind our guests who are joining us online to stay online and enter in your CEU requests. Make sure you put in your name, your email, and which kind of credit you want. I also want to highlight to everybody that we have a new podcast series. If you go to conference-board.org/podcast, you'll see that we have 6 new podcast series in ESG and influencers, off-the-shelf insights, indicators, and the sustaining capitalism. All really interesting conversations that I'm sure you'll be interested in. And finally, I want to thank you all for joining us. And as a way of thanking you, if you would use this code KN1 when you register for this year's Leadership Development Conference, we'll give you a $500 discount and make it easier for you to attend. It's April 30th and May 1st in New York City, and June 4th and 5th in Chicago. So thanks again to Richard, Matt, and Erica. Really appreciate you taking part of your day to share with everybody. And thanks all of you who are joining us online for a rich conversation. Appreciated your questions and your participation. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.